Hi all, a very good morning. Okay, so quickly we'll go ahead and start our session here. So we were looking in at our S3 section of our course, that is about simple storage service, and then we also learned about the basics on what is S3. How do we get started with it? We started learning the things on what we can actually store on S3. So S3 is basically object-based storage where we can store any kind of object. We have different tiers of storage in S3, that is S3 standard, S3 IA, and the RRS, that is reduced redundancy storage. And we learned how do we store the data. Specifically, we have to create a bucket in specific region, and then we'll be able to start storing the data on the S3. And whenever we are going to upload any specific object, we do have different kind of properties for each object, as well as how do we manage the permissions for that specific object. Next, we have the properties for the bucket, and how do we manage the permissions for a bucket, and then we also have management rules for the bucket. So we were looking in at the management rules of the bucket. So let's quickly get started with it. I'll log in into my console. So it's taking a little while to load the page. Okay, so I'll quickly navigate down to the services section, and then in the storage, I'm going to click on S3. So in here, I have a couple of buckets in my AWS account. So let's quickly go down to one of the bucket that is with the name AWS String 2018. And in this, we learned about the properties, we learned about the permissions, and now we are going to explore on the management part. So in the management part, we learned about what is a replication. So replication is basically, we call it as a cross-region replication enablement on a specific bucket. So what is a cross-region enablement? It is basically we are trying to create a complete copy of bucket in some other region. So as a part of our disaster recovery, so if something happens to, let's say, some certain region that is out of the scope, but of course, like, yes, there's a part of our disaster recovery, we should be ready with these things. So let's say something happened across the Mumbai region and it is completely down. So how do I get my data back? right? Because I cannot keep my customers waiting for the data, and I have to always be on the toes so that the data is available for my customers. So how do we get it back? So as a part of disaster recovery, we basically would enable this cross-region replication. So whatever is getting stored in my S3 bucket in the Mumbai region, let's say, I want to go ahead and replicate the same content inside some other bucket as well in some other region. So I will be able to do this with the help of cross-region replication. But cross-region replication has one rule that has to be enabled, that is versioning. So versioning has to be enabled on the source bucket as well as the destination bucket. Only then it will be able to replicate the objects. And the second thing is, only the future uploads done to the bucket at the source will only be replicated to destination. So if you already have some certain set of objects in the source bucket, and then after that you enable the cross-region replication, and in that case only the every future upload of object is going to get replicated. So the previous objects we may have to first go ahead and copy them manually. And today we are going to talk about the life cycle rules. What is life cycle rule? So as the name says, life cycle, right? So it is basically the life cycle of a specific object on the S3 bucket. Now we all know that there are three different tiers of storages, that is S3 standard, S3IA, that is infrequent access, and S3RRS, that is reduced redundancy storage, and we have the glacier. If I start storing all the objects as a part of my S3 standard, and if I do not change the storage class, then maybe over the time, if I accumulate lot of objects in my bucket, then it is going to cost me a lot. Maybe I'm not using all the objects every day, right? So over the time, I'll have to decide the life cycle of my specific object so that I'll be able to optimize the cost on the bucket. So how do we do it? So remembering these storage tiers in the storage tiers of the class, we are going to apply this life cycle rules. Now, getting started with the life cycle rules. So you will get an option to add life cycle rule here. I'll just go ahead and click on this add life cycle rule. So the first thing is name and the scope. So what is the name of a life cycle rule and what is the scope of this specific rule? So now the name, I'll just go ahead and say it as my first life cycle rule. And then the scope is basically whether you would like to apply it to complete bucket, or if you have certain folders inside a bucket, would you like to apply it only to a specific folder inside a bucket, you can do that. So for now I'm going to leave it blank so that it is basically defined as scope for the entire bucket, and then click on next. So the first part is transitions. So as the name itself says, transition. So we are going to send some data from S3 standard to infrequent access, from infrequent access to the glacier, and play around with it. So let's go ahead and configure the transition rules. Now, there are two things that we have on each bucket, whether the versioning is enabled or disabled. So if the versioning is enabled, we will have current version, previous versions, right? So if it is enabled, if it is disabled, then I will not have anything. It is just the only one, it is only one copy of each object if it is disabled. But if it is enabled, I'll have the current version and there might be previous versions for each object as well. So our transition specifically will depend upon whether the versioning is enabled or not. So if I click on the current version, So let's first assume the case that versioning is disabled, right? So in this case, I'll just have only the current version. So I'll not have any problems with any other version of the objects in my case. So what happens with the lifecycle rules now? So the first rule of transition is here. So I'm going to first move my object from S3 standard to S3 infrequent access. Right? So it is saying that I'm going to transition the object from S3 standard to S3 infrequent access after how many days? So after 30 days. So initially, whenever I'm going to store any object on the S3 bucket, it is going to be a part of S3 standard. But exactly after 30 days, I'm planning to move this object to the infrequent access. Now, if I try to reduce this number of days, you see, it gives me error saying that a minimum of 30 days is required before transitioning the object to infrequent access storage class. So if you're trying to push any object from S3 standard to S3 IA, you will be able to do it manually, yes, without any problems. But if you want to apply this lifecycle rule, then in that case, you will have to wait for 30 days in the S3 standard, and then only you will be able to get it into the infrequent access storage class. So let's keep this 30 here. And then next, let's add one more transition. So I'll be able to add two transitions overall. And the next transition is basically moving to Glacier. So once it is in the infrequent access, from there I'll be able to move it to the Glacier. But after how many days? So here if you see days after object creation. So let's say the object is created today. So if I consider today to be December 1st, then on the December 31st, I'll be able to see that the object is being transitioned from the S3 standard to infrequent access, and exactly 30 days from there, which means 60 days from the date object of creation. That is on Jan 29th, this object is going to get into the Glacier. Right, so always Amazon considers the days from after the object creation here. So whenever the object is created, from that day it considers. So it is 60 days from the object's creation date, or if you see in other way, it is 30 days. It has to stay in the infrequent access, and then it will be able to send the data to the Glacier. Now let's see if I want to reduce this one. No, I'll not be able to reduce. It says it has to stay a minimum of 30 days in the standard infrequent access before transitioning to the Glacier. Now we'll not have RRS in these specific transition rules because RRS doesn't have a durability. RRS has a durability of 99.99%, which means out of every 10,000 objects that I am going to store on the RRS, there is a tendency that I'll be able to lose one object. So we'll not be able to apply the transition rules with the RRS. So transition rules are basically applied only on the S3 standard, infrequent access, and then straight away into the archival, that is Amazon Glacier. So let me put it up in the notepad here. So what is that we are going to do? So currently the versioning is disabled. So I just have to deal with one version of the object. So what happens in this case with the lifecycle rules? So the first part is object gets uploaded and it has to stay for 30 days. So the object is getting uploaded as S3 standard, and exactly after 30 days I'll be able to put it into S3 IA, that is infrequent access, and exactly after 30 more days, that is I'll also write it as 60 because it is from the object's creation date. So exactly after 60 days from the day the object was created, I'll be able to send it to the Glacier. Glacier is basically a place where we archive it. Now, is it possible that I can straight away send the object from S3 standard to Glacier? I do not want S3 IA in between. Let's check it out. I'll just go ahead and remove this rule. Yes, it is very much possible that you would like to directly transition the object to the Glacier after so and so days. Let's see if I can change this. I'll just try to put 1. Yes, it does accept, it doesn't give me any error as well. So if in case you do not require that S3 infrequent access, then you can straight away after 1 day. So straight away after 1 day, you will be able to directly send it to the glacier as well. So this is how I can apply the transition rules to the object which has just got current version. Now I'll just go ahead and put on the next step. So I'll just pick this up as infrequent access first, 30, glacier 60, and then let's go ahead. Expiration rules. Now what is expiration? So if it is just a current version, as we all know, we have two different versions, current version and the previous version. So currently we are assuming that the life cycle is disabled, which means I'll just have a current version. So when I say expiration, it is basically deleting the object. So I'll just say current version. So what happens to the current version of the object? So after 425 days from the object creation, I'm going to go ahead and get this deleted. Right? So if there is only current version, I'm going to expire this object. Expire here would mean that I'm going to delete this specific object from the S3 bucket. So here I can again go ahead and change the number of days. I can say 360. I can also say, let's say 1. No, I'll not be able to do it because our transition rules are currently until here. So at least it has to wait until 60 days, and after 60 days only I'll be able to do anything. So I'll just go ahead and say 61, then it is going to accept it. So exactly on the day 61, you will be able to delete this object permanently from the S3 bucket, right? And then I'll be able to go ahead and say next. So here it is basically showing me what happens with the specific rule. So in our first case, we are considering that current version is the only thing that is going to exist, which means there is no versioning that is enabled on the bucket. So in this case, what happens? So first is transitioning from S3 standard to infrequent access. So I'll have to wait minimum 30 days and I'll be able to transition it. And then I'm going to transition it from infrequent access to the glacier exactly after the 30 more days. That is overall 60 days from the object creation. And then finally, I'm going to get it expired on the 61st day. And then let's say I'm going to save this. So this is my first rule number 1. This is a happy path case in terms I do not have the versioning enabled. So I'm just talking about the now the next case that we are going to talk about on the lifecycle rules is if versioning is enabled on my bucket. So what happens? Now I'll have two different things to deal with. I'll have a current version of the object. I'll also have the previous versions of the object. So before we go there, any questions or queries on the first part of the lifecycle rules where the versioning is disabled? Kirti, Divya, Shiva. Okay. So now when we are going to learn about the second part here, so that is about versioning is enabled. So the moment I say versioning is enabled, I have two specific versions, that is current version and the previous version. So what happens to the current version? What happens to the previous version? So again, I'll just go ahead and write the rule. I'll say my second life cycle rule. And again, the scope is going to be for the entire bucket. I'll just go ahead and say add next. So in this case, I'm going to have both current version and the previous versions. So first I'm going to take the action on the current version itself. So current version will be the same. So transition from the S3 standard to infrequent access after 30 days, and then the transition from the Amazon Glacier, transition from the infrequent access to the Glacier, it is again 30 more days. So overall 60 days I'll have to wait until the object can get into the Glacier. Now what happens with the previous versions? Let's go ahead and scroll down. Here I can add the transition. So again the same thing for the previous versions as well. I can add the object to S3 standard initially, and from S3 standard it can go to infrequent access after 30 more days. And then if I click on transition, I am going to go ahead and again move it to the Glacier after 60 days. So the rules remain the same. Either if it is a current version or a previous version, I will have to wait for the 30 days before I can go ahead and move the object from the standard to infrequent access. So again, I'll go ahead and just copy this couple of things. Right. So in case the versioning is enabled, the current version, as we all know, the object will be a part of S3 standard, and it will take 30 days to get into the infrequent access and 30 more days from there to get into the Glacier. Same is the case with the previous version. So object is going to be a part of our S3 standard for 30 days, and from there it is going to be sent to infrequent access, and 30 more days from infrequent access I'll be able to send it to the Glacier. Now what if I would directly send the previous version directly to Glacier? Because it doesn't make sense to put it in the infrequent access, because I'm not going to anyway access it, or maybe at sooner I would like to send it to Glacier. So can we do it? Yes, let's try to remove this rule and just have only one of them. Directly send the object to Glacier. I can keep it as one. That's great. It's not giving me any error. So I'll be able to transition the previous object as well to the Glacier immediately after 1 day. Right. So I'll also copy this. Yeah. So I'll be able to transition the object from S3 standard to Glacier in 1 day for the current version as well as for the previous version as well. So in the place where I have versioning enabled, so current version and the previous versions will have the same rules. Like current version of the object will be first stored in S3 standard. That will take 30 days to move to infrequent access. That is going to take 30 more days. That is overall 60 days from the time the object has been created to the Glacier. Similar is case with the previous version. It is going to take minimum of 30 days before it can transition from the S3 standard to infrequent access, and overall 60 days from the infrequent access to the Glacier. So in case if I want to directly send the object to Glacier, I just have to wait for 1 day and I'll be able to send it across. For now, I'll just go ahead and keep this one as 30 and 60. So I have versioning enabled on my bucket, so I have to apply the rules for current version as well as the previous version. So for the current version, I'm keeping the transition from standard to infrequent access 30 days, infrequent access to Glacier 30 more days, that is overall 60 days, and similar is the case for the previous objects. Now let's go ahead and click on next here. So now when we come down to expiration rules, now we have to deal with the expiration rules also for the two cases. One is for the current version and second is for the previous versions. So we just read that if it is only with the versioning disabled, which means if it is only current version, then specifically we are going to get object deleted, right? But if it is both current and the previous version, what happens? Now specifically when I say current version, expire the current version of the object. So here it is giving me number of days. So I cannot keep it less than 60 because I have kept the rules here until Glacier of 60. So I'll have to wait minimum of 61 days, right? So it says the value should be greater than or equal to 61. So I'll have to wait for 61 days before I can expire the object. Now, since we are talking about the case where versioning is enabled on the bucket, so what does the expiration do? Expiration is basically going to place a delete marker on the object. Okay, so here if you scroll on the I, it clearly says for versioning enabled buckets, an expire action retains the current version as a previous version and places a delete marker on the current version, right? So nothing happens onto the object, it just places a delete marker. So we know what is delete marker. So if object has been deleted from the S3 bucket, when the versioning is enabled, basically the object doesn't get deleted overall, it is inside the bucket itself, but with the delete marker, right? So on the 61st day, it is basically going to place a delete marker on the current version. Now, if you really want to delete the complete objects from the S3 bucket, then you have to use these previous versions. So here you get an option to permanently delete the previous versions. So again, here as well, I'll be able to put it as 61, and then I'll be able to permanently delete the object from the S3 bucket. Right? So what happens in this case? The current, if I have current version and the previous versions, which means versioning is enabled, in this case I'll be able to expire. Here expire basically means placing a delete marker. Exactly after how many days? It is 61 days if this is the case. And again, same here. I'll just go and copy. So this is going to permanently delete after 61 days. Now let's say if I have in the transition rules, I'm directly sending it to Glacier. I do not have any infrequent access. I'll remove this part. I'm just sending it to Glacier within 1 day in both the cases. Then what happens? Here I'll be able to put it as 2. Right? Then I'll be able to put it as 2. So if I put it as 1, it is not going to pick up because it says 1 day it is going to take to get inside the Glacier, and second day only I'll be able to expire the object. Right? So this is how I can apply the rules of life cycle to both when the versioning is disabled and when the versioning is enabled. Now there is one small part. If you scroll down the page, you see this option with the cleanup incomplete multi-part uploads, as well as cleanup expired object delete markers. Now I'll not be able to enable this when I'm trying to use the above options. So it is clear you cannot enable cleanup expired object delete markers if you enable the expiration. So if I'm going to enable this expiration rules, then I'll not be able to enable this part, because anyway we are going to mention what should happen with the object, whether they get expired or whether they get permanently deleted. However, if you see, there's one more small part which says incomplete multi-part uploads. So what is incomplete multi-part uploads? So until here, everything is clear. Okay. Okay. So now we are talking about the multi-part uploads. So what is multi-part? Now as the word itself means multi-part. So whenever there is a specific object, I am trying to break it into multiple parts. So Amazon recommends that if I have a specific object, let's say I have a file of 1 GB of movie, which I want to upload it to the S3 bucket. So if I start uploading the 1 GB directly, it will get uploaded. There's no doubt about it. But let's say there is some problem in the internet and you suddenly got disconnected in between, or if there is problem with the power, there was a sudden power disruption at my place and I lost the power, then what happens to that object? Let's say you started uploading and currently it has uploaded 500 MB, that is half the way, and now it is still just 50 more percent of the object to get uploaded. But what will happen in this case? So whenever there is a power disruption or if there is problem with the internet, this 500 MB whatever we have uploaded is also gone, so it's lost. So I'll have to again start the upload from the first. So it becomes really a tedious task in case if I'm going to face these intermittent problems. So Amazon always recommends that if you have a file which is of larger size, try to just go ahead and break it into smaller pieces. So let's say if it is 1 GB of file, I'll try to make it into 10 pieces of 100 MB. Right, so now what I'm trying to do, I'm basically trying to divide 1 GB of file into 100 MB chunks, and these 100 MB chunks are specifically going to be uploaded on the S3 bucket. So it is going to get uploaded in the terms of parts. So now even if there is an intermittent connection problem or something as such, if I have been able to successfully upload 5 parts, which means 500 MB is successfully done. Right, so even if the power goes off, this 500 MB is going to stay in the S3 bucket. I still have to worry only about the 5 more objects, that is other 500 MB part. So Amazon always recommends that if the size of the file is greater than 100 MB, minimum 100 MB, that is a recommendation from Amazon. So if you're trying to upload any file which is greater than 100 MB, just start using the multi-part upload, because any size greater than 100 MB, sometimes it becomes difficult if you have any problems with the internet or the power or the network or anything as such. So any file which is greater than 100 MB, a recommendation is try to divide it into the parts, and then we will be able to easily upload the objects. So now when we talk about this, so I hope the multi-part upload is clear. So recommendation would be always to break it into the parts and then upload, so that we don't lose the data or we don't waste the time. Because if there is an intermittent problem, it is going to stop off immediately, and we have to again start the upload from the first. So here now if you see, check out the rule, clean up incomplete multi-part uploads. Now let's say I started uploading this movie file of 1 GB which was divided into 10 different sizes of 100 MB. So I was able to upload the 500 MB successful. I still have to upload the 500 MB more, and there was some power problem at my place, and after that even I forgot to upload the other 5 parts. So there was a power disruption for at least few hours together, so that actually completely disrupted the work. So I have went out and I left off the other 500 MB to be uploaded. Now I don't want this 1 GB of file to be any more uploaded on the S3 bucket, because to whom I wanted to share, I have already given it in the pen drive, let's say. So I don't want to upload the other 500 MB at all. So what will happen about the 500 MB that is already existing on the S3? It is going to occupy the charges for the amount of storage that you are doing. So how can we improve the situation? So there is something called as clean up incomplete multi-part uploads. So if I enable this, it is basically going to say me how many number of days after which I should clean it up. So here by default is 7 days. So you can keep it here as something as 15 days. So just wait only for 15 days, and within 15 days if you're not getting any final parts of the multi-part, then please go ahead and delete the first level of parts which are uploaded on the S3 bucket. So in this way I'll be able to optimize the cost, because unnecessarily I'm paying the money for 500 MB of storage, and I know that I'm not going to upload this 500 MB anymore, because I have already shared the file with the pen drive to my one of colleague who was in requirement. right? So this multi-part uploads in case if you have something that you have left off in between and you forgot to clean it up, so you want system to clean it up automatically, so you can enable this and just enable the number of days after which it should get cleaned up, and then go ahead and click next, so it will be basically cleaned up. So any questions here on this multi-part upload part from any one of you? Okay, so now I can just click straight away, go ahead and click on next and then say save. So here it clearly says there are some rules which are actually overlapping with the first life cycle rule. So you may want to actually have a look at it. That's fine. Anyway, we are not going to save this. I'll just go ahead and close this across. So just remember what is life cycle. Life cycle rules are basically helping us to optimize the cost of a object. And how do we optimize? Specifically, we are transitioning the storage class of the object from S3 standard to S3 infrequent access, and from S3 infrequent access to the glacier. And from the glacier, we are talking about the expiration or the permanently deletion of the object. So we can actually apply the lifecycle rules to the entire bucket, or maybe to just some folders inside the bucket can also be possible. And finally, we also learned what is multi-part upload on this specific case. So that was about the lifecycle rules of the specific S3 bucket. Okay, in terms of the replication, so what does replication mean? As the name itself says, replication. So I want to basically store the complete backup of my bucket at some other region. Now, if you see the photo here, it clearly shows there is one bucket in one region, and I'm trying to store the complete content of this bucket in the separate bucket here. So how do we enable this? Now we all know whenever I try to store any object on the S3, it is automatically going to be stored in the number of availability zones that specific region has. So if I'm trying to use Mumbai as a S3 bucket region, then automatically it is going to store 2 copies because it has got 2 availability zones. If I'm trying to store it in Sydney, it is automatically going to store in 3 availability zones, so it is going to create 3 copies of it. If I'm trying to store it in North Virginia, it has got 6 availability zone, and it is going to store in the all the 6 availability zones with the 6 different copies. But still, why would I require a cross region replication? Now sometimes it might happen that complete region is down. That is not happened yet, but let's say some world war has started, which we are not expecting to happen, but just a curious case, some world war has happened, and suddenly the one complete region itself has gone down, like Mumbai has gone down. Now I want the data to be available for my end users. So how do we do it? Specifically, we're trying to take a complete backup of the bucket and keep it in some other region. So if I go ahead and click on add rule here, so currently it says this bucket doesn't have the versioning enabled. As we first said about it, in order the replication rules to work, both the source bucket as well as the destination bucket should have the versioning enabled. So I'll just first click on enable versioning here. So once I have enabled the versioning on the source bucket, it does ask you if you would like to apply the scope completely to this bucket or only to certain contents. So you can also say certain folders inside this bucket. So for now, I'm just going to keep it as entire contents of the bucket, and then the status is basically enabled, and then the replication criteria, we are going to go ahead and set it up in the next case. Destination bucket. So what is the destination bucket going to be in this case? So if you want, you can replicate with the buckets in this AWS account, or you can also replicate with the buckets in some others AWS account as well. Let's keep it as bucket in this account, and then it is going to ask you if you already have the buckets. You will be able to see the name here. So I have AWS training backup, which is part of my North Virginia. So I can select that one, or I can also go ahead and create a new bucket. But remember, if you're selecting an existing bucket, you have to enable the versioning before you can select this bucket here. And then this clearly says the bucket doesn't have the versioning enabled. So I need to manually go ahead and enable the versioning on this currently existing bucket with the name AWS training backup, and then only I'll be able to proceed for the replication rule. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say create a new bucket. And then it is going to basically ask you the name of the bucket that you're going to create. And in which region you want to create. Maybe let's say I want to put it in Singapore, and then it is asking you if you would like to change the storage class, right? Because if whatever you're trying to store in the backup bucket, some people would like to optimize the cost maybe. So if they want to store everything as a part of the S3 infrequent access, right? So they can do it here. Or if I do not enable these rules, which means that the object is going to be a part of the same storage class as it was stored in the source bucket. So the source bucket and the destination bucket will have the same storage class. So if you want to change it manually, you have to click on this, and then you'll be able to change the storage class for each object. So for now, I'll just leave it as blank and then just say go ahead and say next. Now, whenever I would like to replicate one object from one S3 bucket to the other, there needs to be a role enabled so that it will be able to securely transfer the objects from one S3 bucket to the other. So I need to go ahead and create a role. So in case if you do not have a role, just go ahead and click on create a new role. Automatically the new role will be created between the source and the destination bucket by Amazon itself, and it is going to automatically replicate the object. And then I'll just go ahead and say next, and then save this part. So the moment I save this, now if I'm going to upload anything on this bucket, it is automatically going to get replicated to this destination bucket, which is with the name AWS Training 2018 Backup. And if you see, this role has been automatically created by the Amazon for me. I didn't do any manual intervention, but I just asked it to create a new role, and it has been able to create it across for me. So with replication, you just have to remember two things. Both the source and destination bucket needs to have the versioning to be enabled, and only the future uploads of the object are going to be taken care in the replication. Like I have already got 6 to 7 objects which are inside my bucket. If you go back to S3 and go to backup, you see it is still going to be empty. So now let's go down and upload something to this bucket. So I'll just go and upload a small file. So let's say I want to go down to the Pawan folder, and I would like to upload this Airtel speed test. So now you will see that in a little while, this object is going to get replicated automatically to the backup bucket as well, which is in the Singapore. There we go. We have now received the object in the backup bucket as well. And since versioning is enabled on both of them, I'll be able to say hide and show for each of it. We'll be able to track through. So that was about the replication. So any questions here on the cross-region replication? So finally, three more things which are left on the management. One of them is analytics, metrics, and the inventory. So we have three more things in the part of our management here: analytics, metrics, and the inventory. So first talking about the analytics. So what does the analytics actually do across? So if you just click on the analytics, you see on the top, it says it is basically going to display the storage analytics for this bucket. So what is the storage analytics of this bucket? So basically, if I go scroll down here, currently I do not have any rules. If I just simply go ahead and say add, it is just going to ask me the name of filter and leave empty for entire bucket. So if I want to tag it for specific folder, I'll be able to do it. And if you want to filter it, you'll be able to filter it with this specific name. And if you want to export the data, you'll also be able to export the data as well. Now, what does this specifically do? As I just said, it is basically going to show you the storage class. How many objects are basically stored as a part of S3 standard? How many objects are basically stored as a part of S3 infrequent access, and all those things that are being shown. Let's see if I go down to my bucket in the overview. I have something with the HTML files. Let's see if it is able to track each of them. I'll just put across on analytics. So it may take a little while. So it may take a little while because it has to basically analyze the data. So the moment I go ahead and enable it, it starts analyzing the data for the specific file or specific folder, whatever I have given it, and it's specifically going to tell me how much this data is being used or how many people are actually using it. And if it is not the case, shall I still be storing as a part of S3 standard or not? Because with the help of this analytics, I'll be able to decide my costing. So if it is actually stored as a part of S3 standard and not many people are using it, then it is better I shift it down to the S3 infrequent access so that I'll be able to save the cost, right? That's why it says we are analyzing your storage usage and will share the observed infrequent access patterns. So it may take a little while for this pattern to load. However, you will be able to add more of the rules here. So I can just say maybe star.html. Okay, it's not accepting. So specifically, I'll have to give a file name or something as such, and then I'll be able to check out whether this is a part of this bucket, and then I'll be able to save it, and then it's going to start analyzing the storage pattern for this specific object. So that is about the analytics part, and you can also go ahead and export the data from here in case if you want to export it. So you can export it to some other S3 bucket, or you need to export it to certain S3 bucket from where you'll be able to download that file. So that was about the analytics part. So basically it gives you an insight of what's happening with your specific object, how many days it has been a part of S3 standard, how many people have really accessed this, and do you really think it has to be a part of S3 standard anymore, or would you like to move it to the infrequent access or maybe the glacier, depending upon the usage of the object. So all those analytics will be provided by the this specific portion of the management section of the S3 bucket. And next we have metrics. So metrics is basically going to give you a insight on how many objects are basically currently stored as a part of infrequent access. If you see, it is saying that there are 14.4k, which is basically this bytes, that is of a specific object inside this bucket. Similarly, if I go down, I'll be able to see something as a part of RRS. So as a part of RRS, how many objects are being stored inside this bucket? And if I go down one more, this last graph which says here, it is basically showing the S3 standard storage, then the RRS and the infrequent access. So basically I'm able to track all the three different storage classes, and it's basically telling me how much amount of data I'm storing in each of them. And if I go down a little more, it is basically showing how many objects I am basically storing in a day. So if you see here on the 25th of November, I had just 3 objects, and I was continuing with the 3 objects until the 30th of December, 30th of November, and suddenly that is today, or 2 days back that is. Okay, on the 1st of December, I uploaded 8 objects, and it shooted up to the 11 here. If you see, it is showing up 11. So the total number of objects went from the 3 to 11 on the 1st of December, and drastically if it fell down. And today again we have uploaded some objects, so it is again going to move up. So maybe the graph is going to change a little bit tomorrow, right? So in terms of metrics, it is basically going to show me how many objects are stored as a part of S3 standard, how many objects are basically stored as a part of infrequent access, how many objects are stored as a part of RRS, and on how many objects I'm basically storing in the a specific S3 bucket itself. So you can track it in basis of storage. You can also track it in the basis of number of requests. So if you want to say how many people are requesting for a specific S3 standard objects, you can also get that part. How many people are specifically requesting infrequent access objects, so you can also track that. And you can also put across for the data transfer as well. So if you want to track how much data is being transferred from your S3 bucket to some other bucket, or maybe from your data center, you will be able to track it in this data transfer part. And finally we have the inventory. Inventory is nothing but you would like to receive a CSV file of the object inventory. Like let's say you want to see what's happening daily on this S3 bucket, or on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. Like some people are uploading the objects, some people are deleting the objects. So you want a daily inventory. How many objects were there in this bucket today? What was the storage class? At what time the object got created? If you want to have all those statistics, you will have to specifically request for this inventory file. It's very simple. Just go ahead and say add rule to the inventory, and it is going to ask you the name of the inventory. So I'll just say daily report, and then I would like to get it for the entire bucket, that is this one. And frequency is basically daily. So I would like to get the output in CSV format, and I would like to get all these fields. So it is basically asking what are fields to be included as a part of inventory report. So I basically want the size, storage class, and the last modified date when it was done, right? So inventory report, would you like to encrypt the existing report? I'll say none, and then just go ahead and save this. So now this is going to send me a file every day to my right. So it has successfully created the rule, so it is going to take 48 hours to get started with, right? So every day it is going to send me a report in the format of CSV file. Here it is done. It's daily report for the entire bucket, that is AWS training 2018, and the frequency is daily. So this is going to deliver me a report every day. So if I want to edit the existing rule, I can just click on this. So this report is going to get stored in this bucket AWS training 2018 itself. So you can select the destination bucket where you want to store this. It should be specifically in the same region, or you can select the same bucket. So I'm selecting the same bucket, that is AWS training 2018 itself. So the daily report is going to get stored inside this same bucket. So any questions or queries on the analytics metrics and the inventory part of the management? Analytics metrics and the inventory have been recently introduced around a couple of months, I guess. Before that, we didn't have anything of this case, because I guess Amazon has been constantly looking for the feedback, and they have received this feedback of how we can track the objects in terms of what is the daily usage, how many objects are being stored. So all these reports is something specifically people are looking for. So that has been completely included as a part of this management section, which was recently introduced across. So that was all about the S3. So we learned about what is a bucket, what are the properties of bucket, what are the permissions of a bucket, and what is a management part of the bucket. And inside each of the bucket, we specifically store the objects, and we learned about what is an object, what are the properties of an object, what are the permissions of an object. Now in the next part of our class, we are going to learn about the storage gateways and then the snowball device. So that are also again a part of the S3 itself. But just to give you an overview, what is a storage class, storage gateways, and then the snowball we are going to learn across. Those are the couple of theory parts that we are going to learn in the S3, and then we are going to quickly make a short move on what is CLI. How do we get started with the command line interface? So we are going to download a command line interface tool, and then we are going to get connected to the S3 buckets from the command line interface. So command line interface is simple, like this is the graphic user interface of my Windows operating system, right? So this is how we are able to open up some file. I am able to directly see where it is and all those things. But if I have to send some commands, how do I do it? Specifically, I have to open the command prompt, right? Similarly, if it is a Linux machine, we'll have this terminal window, right? Similarly, can I connect to my Amazon console using this? Directly from this way, maybe not. So we have a special tool which has to be downloaded for that, which is called as CLI, command line interface. So that AWS CLI tool has to be downloaded and installed in your local computer, and from there you have to pass the access key ID and the secret access key, and then you will be able to connect to this AWS from there. So we are going to look about it, take a look on that, and we are going to learn about the storage gateways and the snowball in our next class. So any questions or queries before we close the session for the day? Okay, so we'll close the session for the day here, and we'll connect back again tomorrow at the same time in the morning at 7, and we'll try to explore the next part of our S3, that is on the storage gateways, command line interface, and the snowball device. Thanks all. Have a great day, and we'll meet back tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, Amazon API tool. What is this services on Amazon?
Which one?
API tool.
API tools is basically if you want to create the API gateways. So you will be able to create your own APIs with the help of those API. API is basically application programming interface. Now let's say you have a database, you don't want to give full access directly to the people. Do you want
Okay.
people to be able to access it? So what you will do, basically you will create an endpoint for your database that is using the API, and then you will expose
Okay.
that API for the people, which will have a limited set of access to a specific table and then specific data.
Okay, in my organization, I have seen portal internal skill set. In that we have a project on that API tool.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would like to switch to AWS. So that's what I have searched in that Friday. I found this API tool requirement. Yeah.
Mhm. So API specifically to give you a good example. Now let's say you actually search flight tickets on a lot of different websites, like you have Make My Trip, Clear Trip, Yatra, and other things, right? Now, whenever you're searching, how does these people get an insight on what is the pricing going on in each of the flights? Because it is basically going to give you information about it is going to basically give you information about all the different flights, whether it's a SpiceJet, whether it is a Indigo, whether it is some other place, right? So now what basically happens is the companies like Indigo, GoAir, SpiceJet, they have actually opened up the APIs. They have not given a direct access to the database, but they have opened it in the terms of API, so that whenever the clear trip I'm going to search for specific from search from the destination and the source and for a specific date, it is basically going to hit the APIs of all these companies and get me the data and put it on my portal, saying that these are the list of all the flights which are available and this is the fare for each of these flights. So that is how the APIs are basically going to help in. So we are actually retrieving the data with the help of API gateways, so that the company is not exposing the complete database as well, but it still has given access to the data, limited set of access with the help of APIs.
Okay, Pawan, are we going to cover this concept API tool?
We are just going to learn about the basics of API, but not as such in complete detail. We are not going to go in our course.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Pawan.
Thanks all. Have a great day, and we'll meet back tomorrow at the same time.